police anymore. It's fuck the FBI.
Stomach sick, it's getting harder to breathe.
Criminals! You're all fucking criminals! You wear that fucking badge!
There is nothing to praise. Will you come with me? Will you stand with me? Would you follow me? Would you believe with me? Tell me you'll agree with me. Tell me you'll die with me. Come on, let me hear your war cry. Come on, get on to me, your war cry. Come on, get on to me, your war cry. Come on.
You are listening to Free Talkcast, where we talk about news and current events from a perspective of peace, love, and liberty. I'm your host, Arya DeMezzo, and let's get right into things. And I'm sitting down here today with Nathan and Emily Berning, already screwing it up, who founded the Let Them Live Foundation. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's called Let Them Live, and it was just kind of something that randomly happened for us, to be honest. We just wanted to help somebody that was in crisis, and the rest is history. Now we've helped thousands of women.
Can you tell me a bit about that? Like, what is Let Them Live?
Yeah, so at its core, we're really trying to address the issue of abortion in a way that actually makes sense, right? We're actually doing something and addressing the reasons that go even deeper. So we raise money so that we can pay bills for moms because women have abortion. The main reason they do is for financial reasons. And so Let Them Live really just tries to meet that specific tangible need. So that's what we do. We raise that money. We come alongside women. We support them financially. We support them, with counseling, with job coaching, a lot of different things I'm sure we'll get into, but we really just come alongside them so that they feel like they have another option, because those times that they go to have that abortion, they really don't feel like they have an option.
I want to just throw something else in there. When Emily and I met, I was pro-choice, and she was known as pro-life Emily. And one of the big things that I hesitated to identify differently than that was because I felt like they weren't answering the questions. The pro-life movement was not answering the questions that I had, which were like, okay, do women actually really have a choice? Is there, are we actually addressing the root cause of abortion? And I didn't feel like that was the case. And so I brought those questions and those thoughts to Emily, and we, vigorously discussed it until we came to this conclusion that there really isn't a great solution or a great alternative to abortion that is mainstream. We needed to create something if we wanted something to happen. We couldn't wait and depend on other people to do it.
Yeah. That addresses like the underlying socioeconomic problems that.
And as much as I would consider myself anything, I would say that I'm probably pro-choice. But this was one of the things that attracted me to you when I found out about you, was that one of the biggest criticisms that pro-choice people have is that the pro-life community overall is alleged to give no support to women who choose not to abort, who are talked out of aborting, or whatever circumstance they happen to be in, where they are talked into not doing it to keep the child alive. And of course, that doesn't solve any of the problems that cause them to want to have that abortion in the process in the first place, which, as you point out, is usually some sort of financial thing, or maybe it's deeper than that, where like the baby's father is abusive and they don't want to have that tie to them. Who knows why people do these things? But one of the main criticism that I've always heard is that the pro-life community doesn't do anything to address the root causes.
Yeah.
And you guys seem to be working on that.
And we felt like, at least I felt like, you can't just throw diapers at the problem. And that's kind of a harsh way to say it, but it's like, that's the reality. That just doesn't solve the actual problem, and the problem is not abortion itself. It's what underlies abortion. It's what leads to abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And if women don't actually have real choice, then pro-choice, pro-life, we all lose, because they're not even getting real choice. So that's what we advocate for. That's what we're really fighting for, is to give women real choice and not just one option, abortion.
Meeting them right where they're at too, because like you said, Arya, there's so many other intersecting issues as well. So obviously financial is a huge piece, but that could also be accompanied with domestic violence. It just could be no support, no support from a family or whatever it is. She could be homeless, like all these different factors. So really just meeting her where she's at. And I think that's the most important thing, is to remember that the woman who is experiencing this situation, like, she's a person too. While yes, of course, we're wanting to save a life, most of the time we actually end up saving both lives, because we've had experience with moms who are suicidal as well. They're just at the lowest point in their life. One of the moms actually was planning to have the abortion and then commit suicide after. And so it's really important that we help these women, because they feel so hopeless sometimes.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, I mean, personally, I understand, as somebody who has, I mean, it's hard to even talk about, but just I have a history of, probably abortion in my past. It's hard to talk about that, but it's something I don't want people to actually have to go through or think about themselves. And I want people to have real alternatives to abortion, so that they don't feel backed into that corner and like it's the only thing that they can choose. So again, like perfect example, Mary Ann is a recent mom that we helped, and she was pregnant with triplets, and that's what caused her to consider abortion. She was not somebody who would ever consider abortion in any other circumstance, but she was in her 40s, and she's like, look, I didn't think I was going to have three more babies, three more kids. I already have a kid that's like 18. I don't, how can I do this? And we just came alongside her and said, we'll help you do it. We'll pay your rent, gas, utilities, car payments for a year, whatever. We just want to make sure that you get to actually choose, and that you're not just forced into doing something you don't even want to do, you know? And that's what we find in so many circumstances. I mean, it's at least 70%. It's probably closer to 90% of all circumstances. If they had an alternative, that's what they would select. They just don't have an alternative that's mainstream yet, you know?
I certainly don't have the data, but that is something that I've never really thought about in that context, is that the socioeconomic environment that a lot of these people find themselves in does sort of force their hand and remove choice from the equation entirely. I do know some people who have used it as a form of birth control, and this is pretty much hated by everybody on every side of the aisle, but that's different, and that's more of an issue with just people's moral lapse, I suppose, instead of just using contraceptive or any of the millions of other ways that people have of not getting pregnant. But it does seem, I recall going to an abortion clinic once with someone, and everyone there was there either for one of two reasons. And I say everyone that I talked to, I suppose, because I didn't talk to everyone. And one of the most common things was that they just couldn't afford it. And the second most common was that the father of the child was either not going to be present or was just abusive, and they didn't want those ties to them. And those are major issues that, yes, in the grand scheme of things, means that those women did not really have a choice.
Yeah, that's what we see more than anything. I mean, the percentage of individuals that have abortions that actually want them is very low.
Yeah. I always say too, and this is something that people agree on, and actually it's kind of interesting because Let Them Live, I think the first time we found this out, we were like, what? This is so crazy. But we have pro-choice donors and supporters like vocally on social media, and they're like, I'm pro-choice, but I donate to you guys. And I'm like, what? Like, of course, I love that. But it's just so wild because that's just not typical.
I mean, it's not that surprising, since it was kind of the brainchild of that kind of a dialogue, right?
Yeah.
But it's incredible.
It's amazing.
It seems like your work extends beyond just the pro-choice versus pro-life debate, right? And I think people on both sides, no matter what their philosophical or, religious beliefs are regarding abortion, they want to see mothers supported. And I think, Aria was talking about women using abortion as essentially a form of contraception. And I think that is just due to lack of education. And I think a lot of people are uneducated about what abortion is, about what the procedure looks like, about what the laws and regulations are regarding abortion and late term abortions and things like that. And I find that a lot of people, once they're educated on these issues, once they see what the procedure is, a lot of people, whether they're gonna be pro-choice or pro-life, it's difficult. It's difficult to watch. And in some of this stuff, it's like almost hard to not be pro-life after like you really see how predatory the abortion industry can be, and it's just so refreshing to see people who are genuinely helping mothers and helping families kind of bridge that gap to just
Nobody talked.
really, yeah.
It's like the tobacco industry. Nobody talked about it, and people, the doctors said it was great. It's great. Oh, look, I'm smoking a Camel, right? Nobody wants to talk about the reality of abortion.
Yeah. Well, I think too with sometimes we forget about the women, right? So we get in this like war essentially between pro-life, pro-choice, Republican, Democrat, and everyone's fighting and everyone's trying to win and everyone's trying to be right. Meanwhile, this crossfire is happening and the women are like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I love what you talked about, Nikki, about informed consent is extremely important when it comes to something like this. Abortion is permanent. It's not reversible. This is something that it's like, once it's done, it's done. You can't go back. And so educating people about what it is horrible. And that's kind of the point, right?
That's what you
But
did for
people
me.
should actually know, right, what it is, especially if we're going to be talking about it, if we're going to be discussing it. Like, it's so important to know, like, what what people are supporting, what you're not supporting, what women are getting into, and I think that's the very least that women deserve is to know what it is for
And
sure.
most people are either pro-life or pro-choice. Most people are not like radicals on either side. Most people actually do want women to really be able to have alternatives to abortion. That's the vast majority. I would say probably 85% of people agree with that. So that's our demographic. It's definitely larger than pro-life or pro-choice.
You all mentioned the horrors of the abortion industry, and this is something that I know absolutely nothing about. So can you fill me in a little bit? Not like the graphics of the medical procedure, because I mean, it's probably useful for people out there who are in that position to know that, but I doubt the average person watching this really wants to get into these specifics. But you mentioned it being predatory, for example. So I would imagine you actually compared it to the cigarette industry, which of course was notoriously predatory back in the day, with Joe Camel intentionally made, maybe not intentionally, but put out after the fact to appeal to children and things like that. So can you give me examples of ways in which the abortion industry is mirroring that sort of behavior?
Yeah. Well, first off, I will say for anyone who, is listening that wants to understand more, Live Action has great video demonstrations, they're just like cartoon or animated, I guess.
Nikki, that's the people you mentioned earlier talking to me,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's Lila Rose's organization. Yeah.
Yep, 100%. And they have former abortionists who talk about it. So I think that's really educational for sure. But the abortion industry, wow, it's really crazy because I think for me, it starts to get predatory when you start to think about how the slogan that people used to share is safe, legal, and rare, right? And then you drop the rare, and now it's just we want abortions to be safe and legal. And it's like, well, why wouldn't we want it to be rare? We have this whole movement popping up where it's like, shout your abortion. This is awesome. This is normal. Let's normalize it. It's like going to get, your tonsils taken out and just comparing it to things that it's just really not. And I think specifically we see it in terms of money. I tend to get it gets a little sus, right? When an abortion costs, however much it costs, and that's, Planned Parenthood's bottom line. They're making all the money off of abortion, and I think it gets a little iffy there. But especially with the abortion pill, I think that's being pushed on women. And I think this narrative of choice has been pushed on women when that's not necessarily what we're actually seeing. Like you said, there's women that are in that abortion clinic, not because they want to be there, but because they feel like they have no other option. And that's coercion, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So specifically with the abortion pill as well, when you have doctors, medical doctors, who are prescribing abortion pills to women without having an ultrasound to verify if it's an ectopic pregnancy or not, you're actually putting the lives of women at risk by doing that. And so it's hard not to question the motives when women's lives really are at stake.
Yeah, and we've had experiences where we're at an abortion clinic and an ambulance shows up. We know we've heard about that happening not just for us but other people. This is a pretty common occurrence at the bigger abortion clinics for ambulances to just show up. It's like, okay, what's going on? And they just keep it
Just
shrouded
cover
and
it
they don't
up.
want to show anybody what's happening. And they have these huge fences with big, posters over them. You can't even hardly see the actual clinic itself. You don't know what's going on. And there's a lot of that that's happening. And it's all kind of because it's behind closed doors, you don't see it. And that's why I didn't think it was a big issue to me. Like when I met Emily, it was not something that registered for me at all. It was not an issue on my mind until she started talking to me about it. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm with you. I'll drop everything I'm doing and I'll help you to try and solve this.
Yeah. It's also kind of interesting too when abortion is pushed as this like great equalizer for women to, okay, well, if you have an abortion, then you can get back into the workforce, then you can do all these things. And, it's always about trying to measure up to men when in reality, like we're totally different, so it's like it shouldn't be advertised as that. And I think there's just so many lies around it, like, oh, if you get pregnant, you can't, chase your dream, you can't rise to the top of the industry.
We've seen some great things happen. Like some of our moms have gotten, like recently, actually, Diamond is about to get her master's. And, they've gotten married, they have other kids, they're successful, they're getting through their educations because we're here to help them.
Yeah.
The reason they weren't able to do that before is because they didn't have this option. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I've seen that there actually are so many resources out there for women and families. This was something I only found out recently. Probably every single city in the United States has a pregnancy resource center, and they don't brand themselves as pro-life because I think they're just not interested in like advertising one side or the other in the debate. But it's the resource centers where women can get clothes, diapers, formula, like whatever they need for their pregnancy and for infant care. And I know so many people like lactation consultants, doulas, midwives who are more than happy to donate their time and their services to women who are in need, and they kind of collaborate with those resource centers, but it's not that the resources aren't out there, it's just people don't know how to access the resources.
that's a big thing that we do is actually just helping people to access the resources that exist, whether that's, WIC, food stamps, rent assistance, utility assistance, even if it's not coming directly from us, the vast majority of our moms are eligible for those different programs. So we're helping them to get on it. They don't even realize that those programs exist.
Yeah.
We didn't realize those programs exist when we started Let Them Live.
And with pregnancy centers, I think the pro-life movement in general, I mean, look, I got to give it to Planned Parenthood in a sense of like marketing. I mean, they got that down. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't like it, but we really have a lot, we can learn a lot, right? I think the pro-life movement might be behind a whole lot in terms of digital media, social media, how you advertise, just putting it all out
or
there.
like how to connect to a larger audience,
right?
Just your 12% of Americans that are like no exceptions, pro-life all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree that Planned Parenthood is good at marketing because they're so tied to the abortion discussion at this point, but they do a huge variety of things that aren't related to abortion whatsoever, and that are related to reproductive health and minimizing STDs and things like that, that almost no one knows about because in their heads, Planned Parenthood equals abortion.
I almost think it's the opposite, actually, after I've done some research into Planned Parenthood, because I actually hear that that a lot, that, oh, well, they help with like birth control and all of these other resources. I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but I think the vast majority of everything Planned Parenthood does is in relation to abortion. So whether that's going to be like an abortion pill, like before 8 weeks or before 12 weeks, or if they're going to do like the other more graphic procedures after 12 weeks. I think they do very little to actually support women.
This
Okay.
is a kind of a scary reality, but it all is a slippery slope to the same thing. So, as somebody who was in a relationship and used birth control, and went to Planned Parenthood for birth control, eventually that leads, if you miss your birth control or whatever, it leads you back to that place because you trust them and they're giving you free birth control. So now you're coming back and you're like, now I have a bigger problem.
That Planned Parenthood can solve. And I guess, in terms too, like they have really, I mean, I think they've done a good job of casting a wide net and kind of, I guess, say good marketing in terms of like I say that kind of like tongue in cheek, I guess I should clarify because it's like tricking people, right? They cast a wide net of issues, right? They do talk about this stuff that they do for transgender people. They talk about, different hot button social issues, and then they kind of bring it all back around to Planned Parenthood or to abortion. And like
And
Nathan
they
said,
have birth control. They have
right.
condoms,
So
but
when
the
that
condoms
condom
are not very
fails,
good.
when that condom fails, it's like you know where to go when you need that problem solved, right?
They
And
they don't give you the best condoms, let's put it that
yeah,
way.
actually,
They're the cheapest ones on the market.
I don't know if there's a recent study, but there was a study. It was very interesting. I can't remember how many years ago, but they did a study of all the different condoms and their efficacy, like how effective they were. And Planned Parenthood's condoms had the worst effectiveness.
But
Like they
let's
had
even
the
say,
highest rate
even if it
of,
was 99%, it wouldn't matter because you still have that 1%, and it
Yeah,
just
yeah.
takes that.
Well, and this goes back to the education conversation, right? So I think it is important, especially like teenagers, but even adults nowadays, like a lot of people aren't really educated about, like women aren't really educated about their cycles and ovulation and literally how they become pregnant. Obviously, most people are going to know you have sex and you become pregnant, but there's a lot more that goes into it. Um, and so I think when we are having sex ed in schools or with our children or whatever, I do think it needs to be part of the conversation. If you're having sex, you need to be prepared, whether you're on birth control, use a condom, or whatever. You need to be prepared of the possible reality of having a child.
yes.
Um, and I
Yeah.
think that layer of it is missing from the sex ed conversation, especially like the sex ed that is going on in public schools, because it's like, okay, well, yeah, birth control, but if your birth control fails, you can always just go in for an abortion procedure. But that also, another thing I kind of wanted to touch on is the lack of mental health support for women after, because there are statistics, and again, I can't, recite the exact numbers off the top of my head, but there are statistics in studies that show that a lot of women are very depressed and at risk of suicide after an abortion procedure. And, I don't know exactly why. Is it, something tied with maybe the guilt or a hormonal thing or whatever, I don't know exactly why, but it's almost like these procedures are done and it's like, okay, I did my, the abortionist did their part of it. You're not pregnant anymore. You're not going to have a baby anymore. But women have to sit in that, and there's no sort of mental health support that she was carrying life in her womb and now she's
Well,
not. I
again,
mean, even if
I'm
even if
not
she didn't want to be pregnant, that's huge. And that piece of the discussion is oftentimes missing.
I'm not trying to get graphic here at all. I'm not going to do that, but I do want to say that the experience that our moms have had that have shared with us after having an abortion is a very graphic experience. I'm not even going to go into detail, but there is something to be said about what they experience when they have an abortion.
Yeah.
And I think that we don't talk about what happens in the bathroom at home, or what happens in the abortion clinic, but people have memories of that and it's traumatic.
Yeah, I think Nikki, you hit the nail on the head with, I think about this a lot. I think about what the abortion, industry or, what an abortionist offers. And it's like a solution to a problem, but really It's like, come in, come out, that abortion's done. I'm never going to see you again unless you're back for another abortion. And then that woman is left with like, if she is feeling those feelings, it's like, where does she go? And it's really heartbreaking because I'm a huge advocate for like mental health awareness. Like I personally struggle with anxiety, depression, like you name it. So I'm very like sensitive to that. And the reality is that you can't just leave women like hanging off this cliff of what is going on. And so that's why I think it's important for women to also know about the post-abortive resources. And, you know, whenever there's a mom that we're counseling and she ends up having that abortion, and I would say this has happened for almost every mom who's ended up having an abortion. She comes back to us and is just broken and is like, I should have listened to you. We never, ever, ever say, you know, I told you so. No, it's always met with compassion. Like, here's resources because there is forgiveness, like there's healing. And you don't have to hold on to this. Now, it might take some time, but for sure, there has to be that education of what's going to happen afterwards. You're right. Suicide rates increase. The use of alcohol and drugs increases drastically. Depression and anxiety are super high after an abortion. So it's really important to focus in on that. And I mean, we have a friend. I was talking to her. We were in our pool, and she was like, "Hey, I don't know if I told you this, but I had an abortion like 8 years ago. I took the abortion pill." And I was like, first thing I said is, "Are you okay? Like, I, you know, did you get any help?" She had it. She didn't even know that that was a thing. So for 8 years, she's been holding on to this and sitting in this. And it was the most traumatic event of her life. I mean, she did the pills at home. She was bleeding out, worse pain. Like it was very traumatic for her. And she just never knew there was any support after. So that's the most important thing, is making sure that we have resources on hand for every situation.
Yeah.
You mentioned the procedure itself and the money involved in it as part of the corruption and just the evils of the industry as a whole. And this is something that I saw the one time that I ended up going escorting someone to an abortion clinic was pretty much exactly that. It was a 2-day process, more or less. They had to go twice over the course of 2 days, each time for a couple of hours. But overall, in addition to just being a miserable experience that they clearly did not enjoy whatsoever, it was miserable, it was painful. It was also extraordinarily cheap for a medical procedure of that scale. It was less than $500, and they were 3 to 4 months pregnant at that point. I don't recall exactly how long they had been pregnant, but it was beyond the bounds at which the state that we lived in was willing to provide the abortion, so that she had to go to a different state. But it was surprising to me, not at the time, but in hindsight, how little it cost to have this procedure done. Having had different cosmetic procedures done on my face or whatever, they cost in the realm of thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. But and like a bag of saline at a hospital, it reportedly costs $800. But you can get this procedure done, this extraordinarily invasive, complicated procedure done for less than $500. So there's clearly some subsidizing going on to make that.
They just charge what they can get for it too.
Yes. Well, and like you said, they're subsidizing. And that's a really good point that you bring up, Aria, is there are organizations kind of like that do the opposite of Let Them Live, where they're raising money, you know, to fund abortions. So absolutely subsidizing, you know, in certain states. I'm sure, again, man, who can keep up with all the different like laws and everything?
It's a total mess.
But yeah, like you know, I know in some places what like Medicaid or Medicare, whichever one, sometimes that's
Medicaid is state level.
Yeah,
like in California, you know, they put
Medicaid.
abortion clinics into the universities, you know, where you can just go and get an abortion, you know,
Wow.
and they
That
fly.
sounds like California, though. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
right.
cesspool for countless reasons.
I mean, I love California. I spent years of my life in San Francisco.
San Francisco.
Former tech guy, like loved the tech industry and loved San Francisco. And it was always heartbreaking. Like it was so heartbreaking to me to hear how corrupt and fallen California is now because of how much I love that state.
Yeah.
You know?
And also, go ahead.
It was something I never really thought about before, where like this person I'm thinking of, who I went to the abortion clinic with, she ended up becoming addicted to painkillers. Not that were prescribed to her as a result of this procedure, but several years down the road, she ended up getting prescribed them, and then she started buying them off the street. And it has become a lifelong addiction since. And I never really wondered about it until right now, but it's not impossible that this procedure, this thing that was done to her, has caused some kind of trauma that she's trying to cope with through drugs.
And then nobody tells them, nobody tells you that you're going to have that, and then nobody prepares you for that, and nobody walks with you after it either.
Yeah.
That's there are some great
Right.
resources out there that we
Yeah.
can connect our moms with for
Yeah.
sure. But
Yeah, we partner with an organization called She Found His Grace, and that's an online like virtual abortion recovery program. And I think it's important for every woman to know that. And something that Nathan said that made me kind of go back to your other point, Aria, about just kind of the, I don't know if this is the word we use, but like the shadiness, I guess, of the abortion industry. We had done obviously lots of different activism and stuff, but in San Francisco specifically, there was a lot that was going on. And even in my university, I went to Colorado State. Colorado State, among many other university and research institutions, have, I mean, it's public knowledge, purchased body parts and different organs from Planned Parenthood. They did it from like our local Planned Parenthood for research purposes. And that brings up such a big question in my mind where I'm like, it's so weird to me too that there's literal videos of abortionists saying they perform the abortion in a certain way as to preserve certain organs so that they can then be sold and used for insert whatever it is here. And I think that is pretty wild.
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of, was it Dr. Klopfer in Fort Wayne? We interacted with this guy, really always friendly interactions, but he's kind of an oddball.
He was an abortionist.
But we're always pretty nice when we talk to abortionists, and we actually, believe it or not, we get referrals from abortion clinics. So we try to be nice. We're not the bad guys when we're talking to them because we want them to refer people to us. But this doctor, his abortion clinic had gotten shut down, and shortly after he died, his family was liquidating his estate, and they discovered, I think it was 2,700 embryos and fetuses of various gestations in like jars in his car.
Yeah, he
had
kept
like a car collection full of babies and baby parts.
Yeah, so it's like,
that is sick.
I'm not saying that that's something that every person does, but there is like a very sick mindset for sure,
Yeah, I mean, but just think of it on a human level too. And it's hard for me to say this. I want to say this without any judgment and, with as much compassion as I can for another human being, but it's kind of hard to. But to be an abortionist and to work in that field and to do that sort of work, especially when we're starting to talk about not administering 2 pills, actually doing vacuum extractions or like manual extractions later in pregnancy where it's an actual baby that you can see, it's undeniable that it's a baby, right? To be able to do that work day in and day out, you kind of do have to question someone's ethics. And I've heard stories of women who were just like techs or something, like a nurse at a Planned Parenthood, like they weren't necessarily the abortionist and they were just pro-choice and wanted to support women and whatever. So they were working at the abortion clinic, and the stories that a lot of those people have, I mean, they probably still have nightmares about it because it is so horrific and gruesome. So it is a little, and again, I try to say this without judgment, but your ethics kind of do have to be a little questionable to be able to do that work.
That's interesting you bring that up. A friend of ours, Abby Johnson, I just watched a video of hers yesterday where she said, there's 21,000 lives that I'm responsible for ending. And she was talking about how she has to carry that with her for the rest of her life and how challenging that is. And my heart just goes out to her and to people like that. And like, I recognize that she's had a transformation and she now understands what it was. But if you were to ask her what her mindset was during that time, it was like, let's keep this machine moving. So she's a manager. So she's just apathetic. She's got her lenses on and she's just doing what needs to be done. And she's not going into the surgery rooms. That was when finally she realized what was happening, is when she did go into the surgery room and she saw it on the ultrasound and she realized what it was.
Yeah.
So I think for some of them, they just actually don't even really know what's happening inside the rooms. And then, the doctors obviously know.
They do. It was crazy. So there's a doctor in Indiana, because that's where we're from. Dr. Caitlin Bernard. This was wild to me, you guys. So she performs late term abortion. Well, not late term abortions, but I think it's like up to 24 weeks in Indiana, or it was.
It used to be.
It used to be. And she would perform them up to 24 weeks. And 24 weeks, we're talking about, I mean, limbs
Viable.
coming off, right?
They're viable.
Yeah, that's a baby. There's viability. That baby could survive if it was born.
The kicker here, though, while she was doing this, she was pregnant. So she would go into work, into her hospital, I think she was at, and she was actually testifying this one time, and she was 22 weeks pregnant. And she's talking about how she's 22 weeks pregnant, and she's doing abortions on women the exact same gestation. And I just was like, what? Like, that is wild to me, because the only difference is that she decided, she's like, yeah, I want to keep this baby. Like, you know what I mean?
Probably
like,
some privilege,
yeah.
to be honest. Like she has income, she has all the
Stability.
support.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the women that are coming into her clinic, they don't have those things.
Yeah. So just mind-blowing to me, honestly.
It is a scary and sobering thought. I'm reminded of Ron Paul. I'm a libertarian, but it's not relevant here. But he wrote a book called Liberty Defined, 50 Essential Liberties that affect our freedoms, or something to that, 50 essential issues that affect our freedoms. And he talked about abortion in this book. And he, of course, used to be a doctor. And he described this one occasion that presumably caused him to become pro-life, where he had witnessed an abortion. And then in the very next room in the same facility, there were doctors fighting to save the life of a fetus or child or baby or whatever that was exactly the same age as the one that had just been aborted. And it was just crazy to him to see that while intentionally ending one of them, they were fighting desperately to save another one.
Yeah. And there's the big conversation is around a woman's choice and women's rights. And when I was more on the pro-choice side, that's kind of the headspace I was in. I was like, well, it's her body and she should have that choice. But once I, entered midwifery and started walking with women through pregnancy and attending births, then yeah, it started to dawn on me, like, what about the baby? And yeah, and then we kind of also have that like ethical and philosophical debate of, when does personhood start, and when do we have rights as a human being, right? Because you're a human at conception, right? So where do we draw that line of, yeah, so it is kind of,
I think Laura Klassen has a great video that depicts
Oh,
this,
yeah.
and it's kind of like it's like sarcasm, and it's great humor, but it really does point out this point where she's like, oh my gosh, she's like this fairy in this video, and she's like, there's this thing called the magic birth canal, and it's so magic because before you enter it, you're not a human, you're not a person, and then you go through this birth canal, and it's so magic because then all of a sudden you're a person. And it really just brings up that discussion of, like, I mean, if you're like half in, half out when you're being born, like, where are you at? Are you a person? Are you
I guess you're
not?
half person.
Minutes before birth, and in states like my home state, Colorado, I mean, you can have that late term abortion. They might say that there's like a point where they can't, but I guarantee you, because I've called them and they're like, hey, yeah, Warren Hearn, Dr. Warren Hearn, he's super old. I don't get it with these old guys doing abortions. I think that's sketchy in and of itself.
Well, the
but
craziest thing is if you
those...
watch an abortionist documentary, these people seem like nice people. They really don't seem like evil people. And I think that's part of what makes it so challenging in a way on our side, is that they are likable people.
Yeah.
I don't think they are evil. At best, I would say from your point of view, they would be misguided. But I think evil requires a certain amount of malice that most of them probably don't have. I mean, they're probably not trying to inflict harm upon the world. They just believe what they're doing is best. But every bad guy ever throughout human history has thought that what they were doing was best. So
True. That's a good point. I mean, everyone probably wants to do good in the world. But it is a weird like debate, I guess, too, of, you know, man, like we won't ever know because we're not that person, but like what do they think, every day when they get to work?
Warren Hearn has talked about it, and he's talked about the conflict. And a lot of the abortionists have talked about this, like that they do have a moral conflict, but they overcome it because they believe that what they are doing is helping this woman in crisis. They do. They believe that in the core of their heart and their being. They're like, I'm going to do the job that nobody else will do. They're like the glorified plumber, right?
Right.
That gets paid a lot more. But the reality is, at the end of the day, what they're doing, there's a reason nobody else will do it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're making a lot of money and they're doing something nobody else will do. And
The vast majority.
thankfully, some of them do wake up. Like Dr. Levatino, he lost his child. And one day he was performing an abortion and he just saw the face of the child and he just gagged and he had to leave the room and throw up. And he performed, I think, 50 or 60 more abortions after that before he quit. But that was his wake up call. Like, oh, he saw his son or his daughter. I can't remember if his daughter or his son in the face of this child he had aborted. And it just blew his mind.
Imagine.
Yeah.
So what is your website for people out there who would like to learn more?
Yeah, it's letthemlive.org. And if you are someone who wants to support, obviously we run on donations because, that's how we pay bills for moms. So there's lots of ways to donate with a current active fundraiser. We're always having fundraisers for moms. So you can read her story and donate. You can donate monthly. Also, if you're a mom, I don't know if you're a woman who's facing, unexpected circumstances and you're in trouble and you feel like you were just considering abortion, but you want another option, you can find, support on our website as well, or on our social media, reach out. We'll get you connected with one of our counselors and go from there.
Now, you mentioned it previously, and I just want to come back to it. What about, do you provide any resources for people who have had abortions, but who are now facing those mental health struggles that we talked about previously? Will they find resources for that at letthemlive.org?
We definitely will continue to counsel them and be there for them.
Yeah.
And in a very loving and supportive way, because they're not coming back to us out feeling happy or excited about it. They're coming back to us feeling terrible, and needing coaching and guidance. And so we really just tell them like, hey, look, there's nothing you can do to change the past. You can just change the future, and we're here for you guys. We love you, and that's what we do, and we connect them with other resources.
We offer lots of different programs that we're partnered with for specifically like post-abortive women. They're trained in that. We do also have lots of connections with therapists and different mental health professionals that we can direct. I think part of the strength that we have as an organization is knowing like what we can do and what we can't do. And I think that's a huge thing because we really do love women and we want to provide them with the very best. So that's also recognizing like our weaknesses and where we can't necessarily, really provide. So we do make sure to have all those resources on hand. We do help women all over the US. So we do have quite a number of resources at our disposal that we have depending on, where mom is located, but we want to make sure that she has the help she needs. And especially if women come to us and they're currently pregnant and they've had an abortion in their past, that's definitely a different scenario that we take with extra caution. Just to be, we're always sensitive and gentle with our moms. We're never gonna be like abrasive with them, but we'll be just extra aware of a past trauma and work with therapists and mental health professionals to make sure she's got what she needs.
This is just a crazy thing, but through the experience that we've had, we've found that women that have had abortions are actually easier to talk out of abortion than women that haven't, because they haven't gone through that experience yet. And now that they have us as an alternative, they're like, I don't want to go through that again.
Yeah,
So
that honestly doesn't surprise me at all. Thank you guys so much for the work you do. I mean, we need more of this in the world, and it's so refreshing.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And honestly, the conversation, like, I think it's really important to have these conversations. And
yeah,
I actually prefer to have conversations with people who, may not see eye to eye on everything, because I think it's important and I think it's a way to move the needle forward, because we actually have more in common. I think most people just want to help women,
exactly.
so there's a way to do it, and let them live kind of just came up out of nowhere for us. We helped that first mom and then it got rolling from there.
I don't think we quite get it either. We're
Yeah.
just kind of like, okay, we'll just go along for the
Roll with
ride.
it.
We're just gonna do what we got to do,
Yeah.